Good evening, everyone. My name is Ike, and I'll be taking the last 3 classes of this course. And today we'll be discussing methods in Java and some object-oriented programming concepts. So, like I said, today we'll be talking about methods in Java, and the objective of this class is to know what a method in Java is, to know how to declare a method and what a method signature is. And we'll also be looking at the different types of methods and a method concept called overloading methods, and how to call methods after they've been declared, and also how to pass parameters to methods and how to return values for methods. So these are some learning resources that I put up for further learning or further information in case you want to learn more about methods, because obviously we can't really cover everything that has to do with methods in this class, so some independent studies also needed. What is method? What is a method rather? A method is a collection of statements that perform operations, and it's usually in a block of code, and their functions are bound to a class, so it only runs when you call it. If you just declare a method, it doesn't, or if you just define a method, it doesn't do anything unless you call the method. So you need to call that method. And some examples of methods are the public static void main that you've been using this past few weeks is a method. And we have a method, you can create a method for anything. You can create a method to add 2 numbers together. And also your system.out.println is also a Java method that helps you print a string onto the screen. So for a method declaration, you have to put some things into consideration. On my right-hand side on this picture, we have what your method definition needs to contain. So it's basically the standard way of writing methods in Java. It's made up of 6 components, but 5 are required and should be used. If you don't use all the 5 components, your compiler will throw an error and you have to go back to fix it. So the first one is your modifier, which defines the access type. If you want your method to be private, protected, or public, or default. So if you see the second image on the bottom right corner of my screen, you can see the access levels. If your method is a public method, it can be accessed by any of these four levels. So it can be accessed by any class, it can be accessed by a package, it can be accessed by a subclass, and it can be accessed by even the outside world. And if it's protected, this is when it is inside a subclass. So it can be accessed by a class, a package, or a subclass. And if it is private, it can only be accessed by the class that you define it in. So yeah, the second component is the return type, which is this integer kind of thing here. So this is which is the second, sorry, it's the second one after the public. So this is what you want your method to return. If you want it to return an integer or a string or a float or a double or any data type, and if you also want it to be void, if you don't want it to return anything, you need to put void. It can also return an object, can return an array, which will be discussed later on in the course. And the next component is the method name. So this is basically what you want your method to be called. It needs to be concise and clear and meaningful, and it cannot be duplicated because it will throw an error. You can only declare method name once unless you're overloading, which will be discussed later in this class. And once a method has been declared, you cannot declare it again because it's just tautology, and it just makes the compiler, it doesn't allow the compiler to know what is going on, so the compiler just throws an error. An example of method names, I would advise you to give your method, to start your method with the verb, so like get, set, say, do, remove, things like that. And then the next part of your method name would be like a noun or an adjective or an adverb. So examples of method names are like get name, say hello, remove name, do something, just meaningful names that you also can remember when you're calling it in a different class or something like that. And the third component is, the fourth actually, is the parameter list. This is the data that you need to carry out an operation. It is separated by commas, as you can see here, and it needs to contain a data type and the name of your variable. And if you don't need any parameters, you don't need any data to be entered into the method, you just need to leave the parentheses empty. You need the parentheses there for the method to run. Okay. So the next component is the method body, which is where your code actually stays in. So you write your code in the method body. It is enclosed in the curly braces, and anything you want your method to do, if you want your method to add two numbers together, it will be in the code block. If you want your method to do anything, this is where this area here, from the start curly braces to the ending of the curly braces, this is the section where you actually write your code. So the sixth component, which will be discussed later, is the exception list. So exception is basically if something happens in your application or in your method that something goes wrong, you can actually catch the exception. You can actually say, oh, if something goes wrong, do this, do that. You can throw an exception, and this will be discussed later. As you can see in this method here, it is public. The return type is an integer. The name of the method is max, and this is the parameter list. So you have two parameters, two integers of integer x and integer y, and this is the method body with the code which says if x is greater than y, return x, else return y. I think my sister spoke about if and else in the previous classes, so this should be familiar to you guys. And also a note, if static keyword is used in the method declaration, which we'll see in the coming slides, it means that that method belongs to a class instead of its instance, and a class instance is called an object. So if you see a static keyword in method declaration, it doesn't belong to the object, it belongs to the class itself. The method signature is just how to write your methods when you're maybe drawing your class diagrams or writing documentations or something. So your method signature contains your method name and your parameter type. So in this example that I've been talking about, the method signature will be max, then int. If you have another method called, let's say hello, and it needs to take in a string, it can be say hello in bracket string. So like I said, it's useful when drawing class diagrams, writing documentations, etc. I hope everyone can still hear me. Just making sure. Okay, good. So we're going to go into types of methods. We have two major types of methods. The first is the predefined methods. So these are methods that are already in the Java class libraries, which fortunately for all of us, Oracle gave us to use, and they're called standard libraries. You can use them at any point in your code as required or when you need them. For example, if I want to find the length of a string, there is a predefined method in the Java string class library called length. So like I said, if my name is Ike, so if I declare a string name, a string with the variable name, and I assign it the value Ike, I can find the length of that name. So if I say name.length, it gives me the length of that name. Let's try and see if that will work. So we go to our IntelliJ, and we go to the main class. If I declare a string, and I call it name, and I assign it the value of Ike, and I say name.length, it will print out the length. And I think I'm going to put it in. Right. So you can see that obviously is 3 because it's IKE, 3 words, 3 letters, sorry. So we did not need to write any code for that. We just called that length because it's a method that has been defined by Java. And if I want to compare 2 strings to each other, I can declare another name called John and compare my name to that name. So it checks to see which name is larger. Let's try that one. So if I say string name to John and name dot compare to name 2, and I put this declare variable here, string results. Actually, this is a boolean. Let's go and see first. You can see it's -1 because my name is shorter than John. 3 minus 4 gives it -1. So it's just predefined methods really help us to makes our code faster because Java has already created those code for us, so we just have to call them as required and use them where needed. And it also depends on the parameters needed, like I said. The other kind of method we have is the user-defined methods. So these are methods that are defined by us programmers, and they are modified according to the requirements that we have. So this is an example of a user-defined method that we'll be doing now. So it's a method called say hello, and I don't need any parameters, and I want the return type to be void, so I don't want it to return anything. So we're going to do this now. So if I go to that and I say, okay, I created a class called method so we can actually separate our work from the main class. So the main class is a class and the method is another class. So in the class method, we're going to create a method which is public void say hello, no return no parameter list, but I still kept the parentheses there because it's required, and my curly braces. So I just wanted to do a simple system.out.println, and I wanted to say hello blue sky citadel. So this is your method called, this is your method declared, your method has been defined. But before you can call it, you need to call it before it actually works, because if you just leave it like this, yes, it's just there, but it doesn't do anything till you actually make it do something. And we're going to call it in the main method. Yeah. So to call it in the main method, you just basically call it, because it is public, you can call it in the main method. If your method was private, you would not be able to call it in the main method because it is bound to only the class that it is defined in, which is method. So we're going to call say hello. Okay, I think I need to import. You might need to import it. Right, okay. There's a slight problem, so not to waste time, we'll just create the say hello in this class. So we'll call it public void say hello, and then system dot out dot println hello blue sky. And we can define the method here, say hello we need to make it static. So if we run it, we can see that it actually says hello blue sky citadel. If I do not run it, if I do not call this method and I run it and I run this application, it doesn't show anything because I have not called the method. So before you can see where you actually put your method, you need to call the method. And if I run it in, I can see the method. So this is just a simple example of a user-defined method. You can also call your method in another method and then call it in the main method. So it's just basically like nesting method. And we're going to create a method called help hello. So help me to say hello. So it is public void public static void help hello, and then I'll call this say hello in my help hello. So say hello, and then I'll just give it a simple string to print out, like, oh, I helped say hello. I think that's what is in my slide. Yes. And I'm going to run this, and then we actually have to call help hello in the main method. If I change this to help hello and I run it, you can see that it actually says hi help say. When it's running, it goes to the help hello, and then when it gets to this help hello, it looks for where it has been defined, and it comes to this help hello and starts running the code. So the first thing is say hello. Say hello was defined in this place. So it comes and say, oh, what does say hello method do? Say hello method prints out hello blue sky citadel, and then it prints out that one, and then now prints out, oh, I helped say hello. I hope this is helpful. You can nest methods in each other and then call the method in the main method. There's a lot of methods. One thing to note is you can write your operations, you can write most of your operations in the main method, but for clarity and for best code practices, it's always better to separate your code and put them in methods and then call them. So this makes your code clear and concise, clean, and it's just best programming practices to always put your code and operations in methods instead of putting everything out there in the main method, because it can be confusing for other developers and they might not be able to read and understand what you're trying to do. So it's better to put your operations and your codes in methods. This helps for easy readability and best code practices. Overloading methods. Overloading method occurs when methods in a class have the same name but different parameter lists. So in my example here, I have a method called calculate sum, and I have 4 other methods with the same name, but they have different parameters. As you can see, the second one has an integer of num, and the third one as an integer of num and num2, and the fourth one as a double and a data type of a double. And overloading methods can be differentiated by the number and types of arguments passed into the method. Like I said earlier, methods cannot have the same name and parameter list because the compiler will not be able to differentiate them. But if they have the same name and different parameter lists, the compiler would be able to differentiate because they are not equal. So they have different parameter lists. You can have calculate sum with 1 parameter list, 2 parameter list, 3 parameter list. They can be differentiated. So overloading method is useful for that, but it should not be used as much. It should be sparingly to enable code readability and avoid confusion. So we've already done a bit of method calling earlier, and method calling can be duplicated as many times as possible. So you can declare a method in a class and you can call it at different places in your program, so long as you import that class. And yeah, it just helps when you need a method, you've already defined it somewhere, so you just call it from that place and it works as long as it is public and can be shared with different classes. A method finishes its operation when it throws an exception, that is, it runs into an error, or it reaches a return statement, or when it completes all the statements in a method. So a practical example, if you imagine that a travel company has an application that has a login page, a registration page, or an update profile page, and an email address is required, a method called validate email can be written that takes in email ID as your parameter. So you have to put in your email as a parameter. So I defined here actually public void validate email with the parameter string email ID. So instead of writing validate email 3 times, you can declare that method once, make the method public, and then call it as many times as possible when you need a validation to be made for an email. And this kind of promotes code reusability because your method can be called anywhere in your project, in your application, as long as it is public or protected. So we'll be looking at how to pass parameters to method. For this exercise, we'll be creating a method called callName, which takes in 2 parameters of name and count. The name is a string and the count is an integer. And I wanted to count my name, let's say 5 times. So we'll create a method that calls my name 5 times. And this is a for loop that I'm sure was taught to you in the past lectures. So we'll create a method called callName. And it'll just be, so public static void void, because it doesn't return anything, call name, takes in 2 parameters, string name and integer count. For my curly braces, and for integer I equals 0, I is less than count, so I is less than the number, then I plus plus because we want it to increase, and mistake. Okay, so system out the println count plus count. This is just be a formatting. Then that. So this is just a for loop that counts my name X number of times. So if I wanted to count it 5 times, it counts it 5 times. So I'm going to call this method in my main method, and this will I'll just say call name, and it needs, because I put in 2 parameters here, it needs 2 parameters for it to be called. So I can put in my name, Ike, or let's put an English name, John. And then it needs how many number of times you want to count it. I want you to count it 6 times. Then I run it. And as you can see, it counts my name 6 times. We actually need to, yeah, it counts my name 6 times, counts John 6 times. If I want it to be separated, I can put a string name equal John. Our name has been used. Name 1 equal John. Okay, I'm just going to use one of the names that I defined earlier. So I'm just going to define counts equals 7 times. Yeah, I'll just put in name, because it's also a string, name, and then counts, which is an integer, because my method requires a string first and an integer second. And I'm just going to format this. So yeah, if I run it, it shows how many times my name was counted. So this is just a simple method that takes in 2 parameters, and when you call it, you need to put in 2 parameters. The order you put your parameters is also the order that your method will be called. I cannot put count here and then put name here, because my method requires me to put in a string first and then an integer. So I need to put in a string first, which is the name, which is Ike, or I can put in name 2, which is John, and then a count, an integer, which is 7. So when I run that, it gives me this. And to return value from a method, for you to return something from a method, the return type must match the data type that was declared. So if I say I want my method to return a string, what I should return should be a string. I cannot define my method to return an integer and then make it return a string. It's going to throw an error. Also, if your return type is void, if your return type is not void and is declared, you should use the return key. If you don't use the return key, your method is incomplete and your compiler throws an error. It just makes your application run into errors, so you have to go back to fix it again. So we're going to use the travel app example, and we're going to create a method called validate email that takes in 1 parameter, which is the email, and returns true or false if the email is correct or not. So we'll just do that now. Public, it's a boolean, and it validates email. Also has to be static, and takes in 1 parameter of string email ID, and you can see already throws an error because it needs a return type. So it's saying missing return statement. So this kind of helps you to know, oh, what is wrong? Why is my code failing? And yeah, we'll just put a default email, default input. So if I put my default input to be guy@citadel.com, and I'm just going to say if email ID is equal to input, return true. Actually, before that, I'm going to put print email validated successfully. Else, return false. So I am going to call it here. First of all, I need to call my method validate email, and it needs a string, and I'm going to put like @gmail.com. So obviously the input I put here is different from the input that was requested, so it should return false. And I'm going to say if it's incorrect, say email incorrect. So if I run this, I should get a false. And as you can see, because it's a Boolean, you can only return true or false. So these true or false are keywords that can be returned by a Boolean. It can only return two values, one of two values, either true or false. So if I run this, and you can see that underneath here it says email incorrect because it doesn't match what I requested for. If I put this email, Command C, and then Command V, and I run it, you can say it changes to email validated successfully. So this is basically what an example of how to use return keywords in Java, in the Java method. So we're going to create, this is another example, we're going to create a method that takes in two numbers, finds out which of the number is the bigger one. So our method name is find maximum number, find maximum, takes in two parameters. It returns an integer, so it's not void. So our method needs to return an integer. So we are going to create another method here called find maximum, public static integer find maximum, takes in two parameters, int num1, int num2, and we're going to declare a variable inside called int max. So if num1 is greater than num2, then I'm going to assign maximum to num1. Else I'm going to assign maximum to num2. So, and I'm going to return the maximum. The maximum is an integer, so it allows for that to be returned. And I'm going to call my method in my main method. So maximum find maximum needs two integers. So if I put 7 and 12, we need to see what number it returns. Okay, we need to put in something. Let's say system it prints out 12 because 12 is the bigger number out of the two of the numbers. If I put something else like 21, it prints out 21. So what this method is basically doing is comparing the two numbers together. So if the first number is greater than the second number, then it assigns the first number to the maximum and prints out that maximum. Or else, if the second number is greater than the first number, it assigns the second number to maximum and prints out that maximum, and then maximum is returned to the method. So without this, if I remove this method, if I remove this return keyword, I get an error because I need to return something. So I'm going to put return max. We can also simplify this method to, we can remove this one, and we can say if num1 is greater than num2, then return num1. We need to put it before it. We can say return, okay, first print out the number, print out num1 and return num1, else print out num2 and then return num2. And then we don't need this anymore because this method is returning in the if statement. So like I said earlier in this slide, when it reaches a return statement, the method finishes its operation. This is going to work because if my first number is greater than my second number, print out the first number and then return the first number. So my method, the operation stops here. If this statement is wrong, is not what the compiler is looking for, it goes to else. That is, if num2 is greater than num1, and it prints out the second number and then returns the second number, and the operation stops here. So let's run and see. We can also simplify this also by defining the variables before we put them in. So if I say int num1 equals 25, int num2 equals 79, and then I put num1, num2, and I run it. I can see that the larger number is 79. I can also do this and just put, I can declare one variable and also put in my variable in the method in the second one, and if I run it, it should give me the same. Yes, 79. So these are ways that you can use return keyword in your method and pass in parameters. That is the end of this lesson. We are going to move on to the second one, which is object-oriented programming in Java.